before we open it up to, let's talk a little bit about, let's go back to the beginning. When did the original Karate Kid become a blip in your individual radars?
A blip?
Yes. When did you first get that call saying, hey, you want to do a karate movie?
I auditioned. I heard my manager, agent at the time said that, you're auditioning for this role in this movie called The Karate Kid, which was like, I said, that's the worst title in the world. And maybe I had the foresight to figure that I'd have to carry it for the rest of my life. But I auditioned for John Avildsen, our great director, and was lucky enough to be the right guy at the right time. And so that's how I got into it.
What's up, everybody? I feel like we should do a little catwalk out here or something. I feel really distant. I don't know. Should we do a catwalk? Marty, go do a catwalk. There it is! Well, let's see. I was born in New York. New York City. Moved to California when I was 10. Have two brother and a sister. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, Karate Kid.
No, you keep going.
So I was acting. When I was in high school, I started acting when I was 10 years old doing commercials. And I did a bunch of commercials till I was 17. I was with a commercial agent. And at that time, when I graduated high school, I said, hey, I'd like to be in movies or television. If there's any auditions, send me out on them. And I went on a few auditions, and one of them was for The Karate Kid. I got the phone call. I was at a gym, literally in a tank top and a headband. And they wanted me to come in.
Even back then, you knew.
Even back then, it was real. I actually showed up. I think my first time was in a tank top and a headband to meet Caro Jones and Penny DuPont, their casting directors at Columbia. And I had no idea what it was for. They handed me a script called The Karate Kid, said read the part of Johnny, come back and audition for it tomorrow. And I went home and read it. And it was a black belt, and he was a motorcycle gang leader, and I didn't know karate, and I never rode a motorcycle, so I thought there's no chance this is going to happen. But I went back the next day, and I met with John Avildsen, and then through a series of elimination of other actors, I ended up reading with Ralph, and I think there were about 3 of us left, and they chose me. And then actually the other guys are some of the other Cobra Kais.
Right on, right on.
I looked at this as another heavy. I was doing Cagney and Lacey at the time, and it was a TV series, and I never liked the title, as Ralph didn't. And I was given the script the night before and said, you have all week to learn it. And then all of a sudden the next morning, she said, John Avildsen wants to see you on the set in 3 hours, it's now or never. And I used all the venom I felt and the anger I felt that I couldn't really represent myself well because I hadn't studied this piece. And I used all this venom, and my ex-wife said to me, she said, why don't you take all this evil and venom into the scene? And Mercy is for the Weak, which is the audition scene, up and down the dojo, screaming, Mercy is for the Weak here, and on the streets if someone confronts you. And I went to the audition, and before I said a word, I looked at John Avildsen, the director, and I said, we wait to meet directors of your caliber. We fire our agents and fire our managers. And here you have me here with no preparation. You're a real asshole, and so are you, Caro Jones. Boom! Went right into Mercies for the Weak. He loved it. He loved being abused. Did the same thing. Did the same to Jerry Weintraub, and they thought I was dark enough to give me the part, and they did.
And now let's flash ahead to the 21st century. Just when we thought things had gone their own direction with the movie remake they did a couple of years ago, and we'll leave that where it is. When did Cobra Kai start blipping on you guys?
I was at the gym working out.
With a headband and a tank top.
I'm not surprised.
My headband
a little bit of a pot belly.
Tank top. My manager called me. I think I got the email first. It was the 3 guys that wrote it, Josh, John, and Hayden, the 3 great writers of Cobra Kai.
They deserve
Give it up for those guys.
Those guys were awesome.
They're the reason we're here. They had this idea, and they called me for a meeting, and I had no idea what it was for. John and Hayden did the Harold and Kumar franchise, An American Reunion. I worked with the writer Josh Heald on Hot Tub Time Machine, so I knew the guys. And they called me for a movie I imagine would be something along those lines. And then we went and sat down, and they pitched Cobra Kai, and I think my jaw hit the floor. And I said, wow. I said, well, this didn't take a lot to make this happen. You can't just go and do this. You have to have the backing of the studio and this and that. And they had already gone through all the hoops, and they had Sony on board, and Will Smith's company, Overbrook, who owned some of the rights to Karate Kid, was on board. And I said, okay, what's left? I'm in, now what do we got to get? And they said, Ralph Macchio. I said, good luck with that one.
So I got a call, actually from my lawyer at the time, who represents John and Hayden as well, and said, he said, there's a project, they want to pitch this to you. And I said, well, what is it? He said, well, I'll leave that up to them. And then my manager called, and I didn't know this, but they've been in it, going at it back and forth for a couple of weeks as they wanted to set up a meeting. But my manager was sort of protecting me, making sure everything was in order, like Billy's saying, having all the parts, the studio and all the rights and everything else. So they flew to New York. We had like a 4-hour lunch. They said, we want to do a show called Cobra Kai. It's like, okay. What is it? And then they started talking about bullying and about bullying back in our day and in bullying presently. And they started talking about themes that made sense. They started talking about entering the world from the perspective of whatever happened to Johnny Lawrence and that being the door into the show. And then they started talking about finding flaws within both characters where each episode your allegiance may change and you may be rooting for someone and someone else would be kind of a jerk, and then all of a sudden the other guy would be kind of a jerk, and it started to the layers started to feel like a more a complex version, old adult version of the Karate Kid, which was so clearly black and white, good over evil, where Cobra Kai is gray and sometimes there's moral ambiguity and the lines are blurred. And then we spoke about the younger generation and how they wanted to pay homage to the nostalgia that we were involved in and yet make this fresh and relevant for today. And all those things together and their passion, and they are the three biggest fanboys of the Karate Kid. They belong in this audience. I mean, they are those guys. And all those elements together and timing, and now with these streaming services where you could essentially make one long movie and cut it up into parts, seemed to feel right. And I called Billy the next day. Billy just, the phone rang like once, twice, and all he goes, I was waiting for this call. He didn't even say hello, what's up, buddy? And then we just started talking, and I said, I don't know.
You doing it? I don't know. You doing it?
I said, no, we actually weren't saying that. We were saying, this kind of feels right. But, how are we going to, what's the next step? And the next step took a lot of time, because it just does. But fortunately, once we pitched it, and we pitched it all down the line. I mean, Netflix and HBO and Hulu and Amazon, they all heard it. YouTube would not let it go. And once that was set, we were off to the races right away. And so that's how we got involved with it. Marty's story. Marty was the big, secret, Christmas present at the end that we couldn't talk about. So Marty can tell you his journey.
Just to cut to the chase, the description of the writers worked for both Ralph and Billy, and as well for me. We had a very simple lunch in September, and they knew our characters better than almost we did. And they said, Marty, we want you to come on episode 10 and set up the season and be the hook to set up season 2, and you'll be a regular in season 2. I said, well, why can't I come in episode 6 or 7? And they said, no. They really were very specific. They were not insistent, but they were very specific with their creativity. And I said, all right, I'm on, And my question was, are you going to make him a continuous bad guy? Or is he going to have some definable traits of vulnerability? And they said something very simple that locked me right in. They said, we're going to make him a little bit bad and a little bit good. So I signed on, and the rest is history,
And we're doing a second season, as you know, but that's because of all of you guys. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
and this is open to anyone. But I was wondering, like, what was the hardest scene to film? Like, whether it's physically, emotionally, or like you just couldn't get a line out, and whether it's in like The Karate Kid or Cobra Kai, like.
I think since I came on after everything was organized, and I had to walk in, and I remember that in the very first rehearsal, and I wanted to do as well as some of the footage that I looked at, Billy had showed me and Ralph, and I really wondered, you know, I was going to come in like a wise guy and just come in and say the real story's only just begun. But how was that going to happen? And I was lighting a cigar, which they liked, and just to walk in, and I kept saying, how am I going to do this? I am experiencing, from what I hear, a lot of perfection from this show. They've done 9 episodes, and I've seen some footage, and it looks brilliant. And I walked in the first rehearsal, I just walked to my spot, and all I said was, by the time I get into the light, the real story's only just begun. And from the other end of the dojo, the crew, the writers, they started screaming, "Oh, God!" And it was only the first time. But they were waiting. They were so equipped and waiting for this character to come. And for me, it was like I could do no wrong. And I was part of an ensemble that I walked away from after one day shooting in Atlanta. And I felt so free and so comfortable with my constituents who had handled 9 episodes. And for me, that first scene was scary, and yet I didn't deviate. But I was so happy when it was over because I was joining a group that had been supported by such creative people. I knew the show couldn't fail. I knew it couldn't fail. I never expected that many people to appreciate it out there, but it was such a, it was truly special. That's all I can say about my first scene, you know.
It's a hard question. I can't even, I've been thinking, can you even think of anything? One thing in Cobra Kai I could tell you that was hard, it was just physically hard, was the second fight when the guys are outside beating up my car. And it's the only thing, I mean, there's a lot of different hard things, but in Cobra Kai, that was filmed like in the middle of the night, like 1 or 2 in the morning. It was 40 degrees, and I had no time to learn that fight because I was doing all the other scenes in between it, so I had my beard on, my beard off, and rehearse this, rehearse that, and all of a sudden, oh, and by the way, you have to beat these 2 guys up tonight. And it was 40 degrees, and the stunt choreographer came over, and he showed me my stunt double fighting these guys and all this. I said, wow, I gotta learn that right now, and it was so cold. So I had to throw that together. Literally, I learned it within 20 minutes, maybe a half an hour. And then I went back to my trailer where I put heaters on my legs so I could stretch because I had to go throw all those kicks out in the freezing cold. So, and then I went out, and before I did that, the scene previous to that in the dojo, when I get into the Cobra Kai again and I kind of do a fake front kick with a beer in my hand or something, I'm in the tie. When I did that, I actually pulled a really bad muscle in my leg because I didn't stretch. Yeah, so then and that was 2 days before this big fight scene. So when I went out there, I'm like, I told the stunt guy, I said, I said, Hito, I said, you know, get my stunt double ready because if I can't do this, my leg may fall apart. I don't know. So that was scary and hard, but I made it through on that. But that was a physically hard one, and there was no time. Yeah. So,
yeah, for me, I mean, I thought my first scene in the show, in the Cobra Kai show, was the scene at the end of the 2nd episode when I come into the dojo and it's Billy and I on each side of the mat squaring off. It builds the tension that sets up the entire series. And I was really concerned about just what that scene was going to be and putting so much weight into it. And, you know, it's 34 years later, and it was the first scene I shot, and it was one of the easiest scenes to do. We were just looking at each other, and it was like 100 years had gone by, but it was like yesterday. And yeah, we have a few more wrinkles and a little less hair, but the chemistry, our chemistry was more palpable than it ever was. And that's when he talks about as being blessed. This project has some shining light on it. And anytime we're on, I was going to initially say every scene with Billy was impossible to do. But the truth of it is our chemistry on the show is it's so much fun to see that stuff you can't teach. You either have that or you don't. And fortunately for me, I had that with Pat Morita in the original Karate Kid. It was magic, and we have a different type of magic working in this show. The scene when I visited the Miyagi's grave, and I'm probably spoiling the whole show for everyone who hasn't seen it, was a tough scene to do because it could have gone very emotional. And it did at some takes, so we had to find the balance. There we go with that word. Find the balance of how to make that work emotionally. So, it's kind of fun to talk about Cobra Kai stuff because for 34 years I've been saying, yeah, the catching fly with chopsticks scene was, which was awesome. But anyway, so that's that. We're now.